everyone. My name is Jacqueline Musabende. I'm a professor at Royal University, and I'm a member of a federal non-profit coalition coordinating a committee. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this conversation. We're so happy to have you joining for this important conversation about the non-profit sector data ecosystem. Before we go deep into our conversation, we would like to start by taking this moment to acknowledge the physical spaces and lands that we're joining in from. I'm joining from Calgary, and I will give this land acknowledgement. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and the truth, we honor and acknowledge Mukinsitis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and the oral practices of Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Ghana, Pikani, as well as the Stony Nakoda and the Swatina nations. We acknowledge that this territory is home to Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation within Alberta District 6. Finally, we acknowledge all nations, indigenous and non-indigenous, who live, work, and play on this land. And we honor and celebrate this territory. I will now give you some details on how we're going to run this conversation. Today we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're not going to have questions and the answers during this session. We just wanted to inform you that we will continue to have many conversations we will host, and we will invite everyone to give us your ideas, questions, so we can use them to prepare the future conversations. This meeting is being recorded, and you will receive a recording within a few weeks, along with related resources. Closed captioning is being used, and if you have any accessibility questions, please let us know in the chat. I will give you now the context of this conversation, this session. This webinar is organized by the Federal Nonprofit Data Coalition. This group focuses on advancing nonprofit sector priorities in terms of data collected and shared by the federal government. The group now includes representatives of more than 40 organizations and institutions. If you are interested in learning more about this Federal Nonprofit Data Coalition or joining us, please get in touch at publicpolicy@imaginecanada.ca. Today, the purpose of this webinar series is to build the sector's awareness of sector data and its capacity to use it to further our missions. Thank you very much. Now I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves, please. We will start with Paloma, Raggo, please, then Matthew, Russell, and then Alisa, Simon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacqueline. My name is Paloma Raggo. I'm an associate professor at the School of Public Policy and Administration, and I have the privilege of being the director of the Charity Insights Canada project, which is a project that seeks to collect weekly information about the charities and their work. So I can give you just a brief 1 minute of who I am. So I've been teaching and doing research at Carleton for the past decade now, so time flies by. And we have the honor and privilege of hosting the only graduate program of its kind of nonprofit leadership and philanthropy in Canada. So I can see from the attendees a couple of our alumni. So thank you for having me today.
I'm Matt Russell from Policywise for Children and Families. Our mission is to inform and on the well-being of children, youth, and families at Policywise. I'm a senior research and policy associate. I was also did my postdoctoral fellowship in administrative big data with the University of Calgary. The project that's most relevant that I'm really representing here as part of this conversation is I'm the lead of the Alberta non-for-profit data strategy, who is seeking to build the capacity of the Alberta non-for-profit sector and provide data to support their needs as they're moving forward. Another role that is relevant to today that I won't talk about more is I'm also the lead of a big project where we're building a roadmap to prevent use data to prevent youth homelessness across Canada, working with administrative data, frontline organizations, all that stuff. A really cool project that you might be interested if you're thinking about building the capacity of the sector or the people you're working with there. Youth homelessness is an issue that crosses sectors, and it has a lot of commonalities for other things that we've heard, even from your surveys, Paloma. So thank you.
And hi, everybody. My name is Alisa Simon. I'm the Executive Vice President for E-Mental Health Transformation, which is a long title here at Kids Help Phone. And I am really joining because I wanted to talk a lot about how does an individual charity whose main mission is serving young people, how do we need and use data in order to make sure we're doing the best work we can, in order to learn how do we improve, how do we iterate, how do we innovate? And then what is the power of the kind of data that individual charities collect for us to be thinking about bigger impact across Canada and globally? And so really wanted to share sort of the journey that we've been on at Kids Help Phone of not seeing data as just something that, yes, we collect because it's part of our work, but actually seeing it as critical to our service provision, critical to improvements, and also to thought leadership and positioning and ensuring that what we know, because young people come to us and trust us, is also known by others. And so that's kind of the position that I'm going to be bringing. I've been at Kids Help Phone for about 12 years. And so I've really been able to see our journey in understanding and using data grow. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Just listening to what you've done, what you're working on, I think we could never have been dreaming to better panelists today. So we just go in and start asking questions. My first question is for Matt. Can you briefly describe what we mean when we say the sector's data ecosystem, when we say non-profit sector's data ecosystem?
Could you throw up my slide? Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so when we talk about what is the sector's data ecosystem, and we're talking about potentially different types of things. So, for example, could we go into slideshow mode? Yeah, thank you. We could be talking about different types of data and all those things. So often when we're talking about the needs of the sector and things going forward, we're talking about sector level data. So things that go across different types of non-for-profits, different types of sectors, subsectors. And it talks about the impact, the different things that are happening in the sector. Of course, when we talked about the sector's data, that's always the vision it came to when I came into this role as a lead. Is it's about the sector, what are the big needs, all that stuff. The reality is organizations may see these things a little bit differently in terms of the sector's data ecosystem. So it may not be that system level picture. It may actually be things that are more related to the needs of those individual organizations, and that's how they see it. So each organization has a different subsector. You may be a homeless serving agency, you may be a person in a food bank, you might be a group that's a sports and recreation group. Those are all different things. So often these types of data, even the system level can get to those breakdowns in different sorts of ways. But the sector might prefer data that's more closely connected to their own system and their own types of services. So I threw up this slide. So we will share this with you. There's one edit that I'll fix later. But it gives you a sort of an overview of some of those system level data sources that I've worked with, and also Imagine Canada does wonderful work with. As well as a couple just simple ones that are examples of how those other types of data sources could link to you as an organization that I often bring up as I'm talking to agencies. So first of all, the one that you may or not be familiar with that I think a lot of people think about when they're talking about the system level sort of impact, big level numbers, we talk about the satellite account for non-for-profits and volunteering, that number one there. So this is an update through Statistics Canada. It was closed down for a while, and now we're actually going to a sort of yearly update thing. This has really been, I think, a thanks to a lot of you here who said, this is really useful data, we want to hear it. And then they started to do that. They actually listened to us. We got that repeat. We were talking to their assistant chief statisticians, and they said, we need to have this data. So every year in the spring, so in about May, I think is the next update, we'll get the data from about 2 years back. 2 years back is about the quickest it can be, because this is derived based on actual data and reporting from agencies and organizations across Canada. And it gets estimates of things like revenue, the GDP of the sector, workforce numbers in terms of number of people being employed. It's broken down by the provinces, which is kind of cool. So you can see, is there differences? How is it looking in those different groups? And then it has these other sort of breakdowns. So as things like volunteering value data, it's not up to date. We actually did a bit of an analysis in the dashboard below that has the newer numbers. If you're interested in those. So what's the dollar value of those volunteering numbers for the not-for-profit sector? And then there's also something that they call the human resources model, where they've linked it to people's demographic information. And then they said, here's how many women are in this sector. And we know that it's a very big number. Here are some of those minorities, other groups, and how are they showing up in the sector? How are they being paid? So you have all that. The data itself is kind of in raw form in tables. So one thing we've provided, it was originally for Alberta, but I was like, why don't we do this for all the provinces? So we just made a slicer that goes in, and you can actually see those main impact numbers across these different data sources. With like a slide, it has breakdowns for different subsectors, all those things in this dashboard. So if you're interested in using this data or working with it, go ahead, use our dashboard. It's free use, it's there, and it's meant for you all. The second one I would talk about just briefly is the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. So this one is a survey where they actually go out and Statistics Canada, not every 5 years, but quarterly, sorry. I think they just released the last quarter. And they have numbers in questions that they pose to community non-for-profits, and then some comparison sectors like the private sector. What they do is it's a very short survey, some standardized, like repeated questions, some new questions, all that stuff. And they say, here's some of the needs, here's the business conditions related to the sector. I found that right now things haven't changed that much with the surveys. So I'd like to say you're going to hear more about Paloma, about her survey. It's sort of like a version of her survey with different sort of things that are more around those business conditions, although some of those questions might be similar as well. The third one is, so if you're interested in volunteering, so the General Social Statistics Survey, they actually have a survey every 5 years where they go in and they ask people about volunteering and donating and different types of conditions. So they actually go out, they call a lot of people, and based on that, they make some estimates of the amount of hours of volunteering and all that stuff. So actually, based on those numbers, we went into that data and we said, this is the estimated value of those numbers. So you can see that in the non-for-profit dashboard if you're interested. But it's every 5 years. The next one just ran. So that means next year or late this year, we're talking about the next sort of cycle. We'll have that release for that data. So if you're interested in volunteering, that's one of those great sources. It's not perfect. It's a survey, all that stuff. So it's an estimate. So it's not meant to be compared years to year because methodologies change. The fourth big one that we often talk about is actually registered charity data. So this is sometimes we call it the T3010 data, and these fancy numbers and letters, and we put that all together. But this is actually the reported numbers, what people, non-for-profits, or in this case, registered charities, specifically report to the government in terms of this is our income, and then there's a few items on staff numbers and all that stuff. So based on this, it has really cool things you can do with it if you're a data person. It does have like the rough things like revenues and expenses, and they match up pretty well with that satellite account. But you could do other breakdowns and just stuff like that if you have time to work with it. Very rich possibilities, but it's not perfect data. We know from this data that it has some issues with cleaning, where it has issues. I remember one group. I'm not going to say their name because I don't want to embarrass anyone, but they were off by 1,000. And I was like, oh, that's a big agency. I'm pretty sure they're in the millions or the billions. And they were saying they were like $100,000. And that happens in this data. So literally what I would do is I would look at it over like 5 years. And then we try to find these trends. So thank you, David Lasby. He's a magic man with this data. So if you want to know more about that, he's a great person to talk about it. There's other people as well that work with it. Also, I would say, like the satellite account, the reason with that one that we actually wait a couple years is because this is tax reported data. So that means it's a year late already. But then all of the groups have their own fiscal year. So it's more like about 2 years back is where you're pretty complete for that data. So you're not going to have exact to the minute data, but it is very rich data if you want to learn about sector impacts and how groups are using their money. Finally, in these big sort of system level sort of data sets, the charitable donors stats is another group. That's from Statistics Canada. So people get the reporting like how much they actually gave to charities in terms of donations. And that comes through like an actual tax file data. And they put this into a file that's linked to some people's demographics. So you can see some of those splits and all that stuff. So like how much was given by men, women, all of that stuff in terms of numbers. Unfortunately, I think there's less donors right now is one pattern we're seeing, although the dollars are going up a little bit over time. And then the last two is, like I was saying, is I know these system level things are not the thing for everyone here on this call, is things like the census data. Like some people are like, it's the census, it's not that interesting, all this stuff. I actually think the census data is a really cool sort of nice tool for organizations that are actually serving individuals, because it gives you things on people's demographics. It can be split by fine level geographies. I don't think I included the source, but there's actually a group where you can clump those geographies together and get a sense of like what are those demographics in that area. So you know, what are your clients? What are those people? Are we successful in serving those people in my area? And we know this from so much data is if you're in one area, that's where more of the access is going to be. So those are the type of people that you'd be expecting to come to your services. So census is cool because it has all of that. It has a lot of breakdowns for different types of individuals, all that stuff. I've done cool things on social economic status with this data, just using their raw files. Pretty cool stuff. Sometimes it's hard to use. So there's lots of Stats Canada training and all that stuff. We also have training already online. So if you just want to go through the whole training series, we have it on our website here. Click through, it's there, it's free. It was made for the non-for-profit sector. We changed it so it'd be a little bit more accessible. So yeah, click there, click on our website, look through. The other thing is you might have other sorts of data sources. So I just gave one example, the community health survey. So I know a lot of groups work with individuals with mental health needs or well-being needs. So this is a yearly survey on a sort of rougher scale to see how communities in a great scale are sort of doing over time. There's other sort of things like I call it CIHI data that has more healthcare data. And there's other sorts of data sources, but they're out there. That's the main thing I wanted to say there. And these could be all tools as you're thinking about things that are talking about the individuals you serve that help you with your goals. They could also be great narratives as you talk about funding. This is how things are going in terms of the sector. So last, I just say, like, if you're interested in all this stuff, these are all great data sources. You could also drop on our by our website. We have a few segments. If you're interested in training, learning to use data more, learning to use the Stats Canada website more, we have a bunch of just webinars up there. That's under capacity building. If you're interested in some analyses specifically about Alberta, go to the Alberta tab. And then if you're interested in other resources, including like finding Paloma's resources and other types of groups, we have all the links in the other resources tab, meant to be like great things and great tools that we've seen out that are examples of things that can help you in the non-for-profit sector. So feel free, jump by. And I just say, like, what is the sector data? Sometimes it's system data, sometimes it's around the neighborhoods you serve, and sometimes it's around the health you serve. Those are some examples, and it may just be your data, and that's a different thing too. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Matt. This is amazing. I asked for ecosystem, and I see that we have data everywhere for everything. It's just probably about what I see to know where we find this information and how we can use this data to improve or to support our activities in a non-profit. Thank you very much for providing us with overview of ecosystem data for non-profit and ecosystem, and also for sharing data and the source where we can find the information. Thank you very much. I will go to the next question. This is going to be for Alisa. I wanted just to ask, how does collecting data help advance your mission at the Kids Help Fund? And what are some of the challenges that nonprofits and charities face when collecting and using their own data?
Yeah, it's such an important question, because the reality is most charities or nonprofits, we are committed to our mission, and our mission is serving people in one way or another, right? So at Kids Help Phone, we are there for young people in every moment of need. And that's what we focus on. That's what we get funded to do. That's what we're writing proposals for funding to do. But the reality is that behind that is a huge amount of data. So when I came to Kids Help Phone, we were really focused in any given day. How are we going to answer every call? How are we going to answer text? How are we going to create new services? And all of that is really important. But then if you're able to take a moment and step back, you start realizing what an unbelievable asset you have in all the data that is being collected or could be being collected based on what your mission is. And so at Kids Help Phone, we started going, wait a second, since the beginning of COVID, we've supported young people almost 19 million times. Through those 19 million times, we have over 40 million data points on youth mental health, including transcripts of conversations that young people have had with us, what the frontline person has filled out about what the conversation was about, or any information we have about the user. We have surveys that the young people fill out about what their experience was, what the impact of the conversation was. So the first thing is we had to look and go, okay, what data is out there? Because we've been having our frontline fill out these forms for years. But we never really saw it as data with power. We saw it as something that we would look at every once in a while to kind of get an understanding of our service. So we really took a step back and we said, where are all of the pieces of data that we have as a charity? We also have a list of every service and support that's available to young people across Canada. We have a group of librarians, and they collect over 30,000 services, supports, from food banks to 2S LGBTQ support groups. That's another data source. So we looked at them all and we said, okay, how do we bring all of them together? Because the reality is when they're all separate, it's really hard to truly understand what's happening within your ecosystem, let alone to maybe leverage it to help others understand what's happening with the population you serve. So the last few years, we've spent a lot of time building up a data hub, which is bringing together all these discrete and unique data sets into one place so that we can actually compare and look at what's happening for Kids Help Phone and the young people that we serve. A few things you got to think about. First of all, what is the data you have? And there's always more data than you actually think if you're able to take a step back and really think about what does data mean to me as a charity, to the people that I serve, to our mission? How are we collecting it? Are we collecting it and saving it in ethical ways? Is it kept in Canada? Is it scrubbed of PII? All of that kind of stuff that makes sure that if you're keeping data, that you are adhering to whatever rules, regulations that are best practices or laws. And then starting to go, okay, what can we do with this data? And how are we going to leverage it? And so within that process at Kids Help Phone, there's been a few different things that we've thought about. First of all, when you start getting into millions of data points, you start being able to think about what could AI or ML, machine learning, do for us? How could we build products? Because we now have huge numbers of transcripts with the real words of young people. So we've built out a model that is using our data to review transcripts, and we're at about a 90% accuracy rate of being able to help our frontline know exactly what the conversation is about, so that they're better able to find the best resources, the best tips that they could give on that issue. So there's all sorts of cool things you can do like that. But there's also things like, how do we share that data back? How do we let governments, organizations, advocacy organizations know what's happening with young people in different topics by population? So, one of the big things when you start thinking about data is specifically around equity deserving population. So at Kids Help Phone, about 10% of our users identify as Indigenous. So we have to follow OCAP principles. And that means that our data that we collect around Indigenous young people, we share back with communities, we share back with Indigenous organizations, because they own that data. But it also means we have tremendous understanding around what could we do to improve our services? What do Indigenous young people need? And is it different from Métis versus First Nations versus Inuit? And so that data has allowed us to also build new services and programs. For example, Indigenous young people said to us, when we connect with you, we'd really like to often connect with someone from our background. And so we learned that from our data. We then built a matching program where young people can text us with the keyword First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, and whenever possible, we try and connect them with a frontline person from that same background. That came from the data. The data also lets us know about impact. What's the difference in a young person's life if they text us versus call us versus use our peer-to-peer community? So service improvements, quality, product development. What are the new kinds of things that we want to build that allow young people to connect and have support in new ways? And then those thought leadership. What is it that we're learning about different populations that actually Canada needs to know? Because the reality is, we talk about data, there is a huge gap. I think it's about 17 years between research and us actioning that research. So charities are today seeing people that we know have real concrete needs. If we can get that data out quickly, in real time, we have tremendous power to not wait 17 years for changes in policies and programs and funding. So that's the power. The other part of your question, Jacqueline, I think was sort of what are the limitations and what are the challenges? And one of the big challenges is there's not very many charities that are funded to be able to leverage our data. We are funded to provide services, and we are asked, how many services did you provide? Who did you provide it to? All of those really important questions. It is very hard, particularly at a small charity, to find the time, energy, and expertise even to understand what kind of data do you have and how can you use it. And so I want to just be clear that requires investment from government, from funders, that we actually say, we understand that the services and supports that charities and nonprofits are offering are critical. That's why we invest in them. The data potential of what they have, what they know, is equally as important, because nobody knows more about what homeless people are facing than the homeless shelter who is serving them right now. But if we don't find ways to leverage that data, then we're relying on surveys that often don't reach that population. We're relying on experts and talking heads who know a lot, and we have all the right heart. But that's different than the people that we actually serve. And so, again, when I think about Kids Help Phone, the power of what we've really been talking about is we have at Kids Help Phone the words of young people. We have the transcripts of the conversations they've had. No one else can describe what they're going through better than they can. But the only way that we unlock that power is the funding, the people power, and the understanding of what we can do with that data. So it's not enough just to say, yeah, use your data, it's really important. We have to be able to build infrastructure within our nonprofits that allow us, through partnership and funding and all of the other things, to leverage that data, because it's got huge power. And I don't think we often understand the power of the data that we're sitting on. I can tell you, social media understands the power of the data they're sitting on, right? Companies, for-profit organizations, for many of them, they provide things for, quote, free because they're getting your data. And so what I would say, as people that work in the nonprofit sector, it is time for us to really understand the power of the data that we have and understand how we can leverage it in order to really be able to move Canada forward and better serve all of the people that we are here to serve.
Thank you very much, Alisa. Thank you very much. This is really amazing. So I see that the key here is how to leverage data, because we all have a data, or sector has of data, but not only people are going to understand the powerful data we have, we need also to be able to leverage it. That comes from, again, as we talk about the ecosystem, funding from government and the other organization to help nonprofit to leverage their data. Thank you so much. I like to read the example of this model you were able to build. That is going to help front desk to understand, when they have a conversation with younger people, they're helping, but also helping you to come up with new services, to improve on services you have, to understand the geography. This is really what we need to know or to understand, so we can understand really the power of the data we have. So thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with us. I'm going to go to the next question. It's going to be for Paloma. I wanted to tell more about it, Paloma. When I joined the ANSA, this is Association of Nonprofit and Social Economy Research, Paloma was there, and I was so happy and blessed to know her. I learned a lot from you. Thank you so much for always willing to share and mentor young people are joining. So I'm going to ask my question to you. This is the question. In your opinion, what do you see as the gaps in the data we have in our sector? How does the Charity Insights Canada projects help address some of these gaps? Thank you, Paloma.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And, thank you for having me. Carleton is located on the unceded territories of the Algonquin people. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. I wanted to also thank Matthew and Alisa for really highlighting the breadth and the depth of the conversation that we have. And Alisa, a lot of what you said actually resonated a lot with the impetus of the Charity Insights Canada project. As an academic and as one who likes research methods, I like to teach about data. I wish that the audience was sometimes warmer to that idea, but it is what it is. One of the things I notice in academia, and I don't know if it's the same for organizations like yours, Alisa, but the academic endeavor is a very extractive endeavor. We ask a lot of information from our organization. We take a lot of the knowledge, but one of the big gaps is really linking back and feeding back, what we found in a timely fashion. And so when COVID hit, we saw this more than ever. We have pressing needs. The needs change on a 2-week cycle, and on what do we base our information? We need real underground data. That's representing people that are hard to reach, We want to make sure that we cover a lot of people. And so a consortium of foundation led by the Mutar Foundation, but including the Vancouver Foundation, Lawson Foundation, and McCall Foundation, launched this call and saying, how can we make this happen? It was a real question, saying, okay, how we have a lot of data. As you've seen with the two first presentation, we have a lot of information. I think we have to change this narrative of we need more data. What we need is perhaps better data, more integrated data, but collecting more of the same, I don't think will solve the fundamental issue that we have here, is to make sure that we are representing the voice of the people working on the ground, representing and capturing the needs and the wants. And so to do that, that's where the big challenge is. And our approach to that, which is one approach, and it's not the approach that will answer all data questions in Canada, because the data questions are complex and they require different solutions. But one of the solutions we had was to be able to capture perception-based data. So the perceptions, the opinions, the need, the challenges, so that they're complementary with the administrative data that we have. We don't seek to replicate, because there is good data out there. It might be in a form that's not always accessible, and that's a big challenge that we're facing. There are technical skills needed to be able to really extract something meaningful for practitioners on the ground that, you know, is not accessible to all. And that is something that we have to, as a sector, work towards facilitating access to data, not necessarily only pushing for increasing the production of data, but the access of what we have, whether it's at the government, whether it's through initiatives like ours, or facilitating, you know, supporting organizations on the ground that are collecting valuable data, but finding ways to support that endeavor as well. So in terms, you know, in terms of gaps, and in terms of idea, the idea for the project was kind of simple. And I give that anecdote often, because as we were thinking of presenting the project, you know, I was procrastinating a bit, trying to write the proposal and thinking, and playing on Facebook, answering these little quizzes, you know, which house of Harry Potter do I belong to, you know, what kind of. And then it struck me that I get survey requests by my colleague about what's the work of an academic, or what's my position on this. It only going to take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and I don't do it. And I'm here thinking of sending a survey to the most busy people I know. Oh, it's only going to take you 10 minutes, 15 minutes, please answer my survey. And, you know, we are struggling with survey response rate and all these things. How can we make this happen? And it hit me at some point, because I was thinking, you know, these long surveys that we answer. But what if we took the box we use normally, which is like this long survey form, and take our box and flip it on the side, so that each week we ask 2 questions, 3 questions max. It takes less than a minute and a half to answer. And we ask the same people to answer these questions over a year, because at some point it's kind of fun. They answer the questions on the Wednesday, and on the Friday they have the results, so they know what other people thought as well. And so we propose that, and people are like, it's not going to work. Okay, you know, you're victim of your naivete. If you don't know, you don't know. Well, let's try it. And, you know, we were lucky that we were able to take that risk. And this year we're launching the 2nd year, and we have maintained an 80% plus response rate. So it means that the same people answering week after week the questions are willing to not only in the first year stay, many of them for 2nd year to continue, because they find not only answering the questions helpful in terms of thinking through certain themes, but most importantly, feeling I'm not alone. I can hear other people's concern. I don't agree with other people's concern. And so it opens this dialogue. So the goal really here is to fill this part of making sure to reduce this lag between we take the information, so make it really quick, we give it back, and then based on that, the next challenge that my team has is to make sure that we build and help facilitate building narratives. Can you make your case based on data? Can you make, how can you use this to write proposals, write policy briefs, reports? And so that's really kind of an important gap that we felt we were able to address. We're starting the second year, so it's not it wasn't a perfect year, but we learned a lot, and now we're applying some of these learnings this year. So for example, on Wednesday in 2 days, we're launching these dialogues where we're gonna literally present what we asked in the past month and ask people to react. And why do you think we're finding this? Like, we wanna hear, should we have asked this or something else? And get this continual feedback, because we're able to kind of listen and react and be agile in that sense. The other important gap, I think, and we often focus our conversation on the need for more data. Data is so important. Data is the new gold rush. Everyone wants it. Everyone needs it, which, yeah, I kind of teach research methods, so I agree. But at the same time, I think an important component is data literacy. We don't talk about enough about the importance of data literacy and data access, because we then focus on the technical parts of data. But data's more than just numbers. And we have to be careful, and I say this as someone who loves quantitative methods, we have to be very careful on overly quantifying information, because the hardest things to measure are often sometimes the most impactful things. Progress is not always something we can measure. So we need to have a real substantive discussion on what data actually means, how it's practiced. And so that we push back a bit on the dominant ideas of, data is financial information, data is this. And we see from our conversation, and this is my ringer because I try to keep to 10 minutes, but we see from our conversation that the ecosystem is diverse, it's plural, it doesn't necessarily all agree, but what we need to strive for maybe, and that's, I hope, a conversation we can have, is a better integration, a better complementarity, and working in supporting each other so that at the end, everyone knows more about the work that is done in the sector. So that's my spiel here.
Well, thank you very much, Paloma. Thank you so much. I really learned a lot. I'm learning a lot, actually. So my background is in software development, data management, and so on. But I like to see people who are really on the field, working or using the data. So my thing is probably to use technical systems and then to find information. But I like it to see when really data is out there in the field and doing things. Like when you say that we need really to start to think about what do we mean by data, so people don't just see data as a financial or quantifiable or data. We need to really understand how data, we can actually use the data to benefit everybody. I like also when you say that we needed to be able to see that as a complementary. So data doesn't agree all the time. That's really very interesting, and to see how people can use it. Everybody can know what is going on in our sector. So that's really very, very helpful. And for people who are, for example, myself, who are technical, I wanted to see data out there serving the population, also helping our sector to serve or to complete their mission. So thank you so much for answering these questions. We have couple of minutes, I think 5. So I wanted just to add these questions for Alisa and Matthew. If you can help us to just tell us what you think about the gaps you see in this area of untapped potential in, of course, the data ecosystem. So we start probably with Matt.
Sure. I'll jump in. I was like, there's a ton of different possibilities and all this stuff, but I think just hearing what people say and all this stuff, it's often the gap is the right data. And people have lots of data, and this is what we're talking about here. Everyone has it all here, but often people haven't thought about the data they actually want to use and all that stuff. And it's not about the questions they want. They may collect it for the reporters or reporting where people say, this is what you need to have for these numbers. And it has nothing to do with the needs of your agencies. It's for another reason or a system level thing. The data that you actually need is really important. If you're talking about that system level data that I was talking about, the big gap we often see is those volunteer not-for-profits. Those not-for-profits that don't have staff, are not registered charities, are not reporting a non-for-profit form or whatever. They don't file the same forms, and their data is not coming into the whole thing. So, and they're a big group. They're considered up to 50% of non-for-profits here in Alberta. I'm sure that number is big in other provinces as well. And that gap, and which is a huge thing because we're the volunteer sector, the non-for-profit sector is very big. There's more, but those will go forward in a couple minutes.
Yeah, so I think I would say there's a few gaps that I often think about, and I talked about some of them when I was speaking earlier, but I want to highlight that so many charities and nonprofits and even non-registered organizations that are doing good, the people that we serve and their stories and what their life is like is not represented well in the data. And that is because our surveys often don't reach them. Like, so when we think about, StatsCan and things like that, and it's because often when we are doing research, we're asking really amazing questions, but we might not be getting to the end user we want to, but also we don't necessarily give their voice the opportunity to come through because we often have check boxes that we're asking people to fill out, things like that. So to me, when I think about the power of the data at Kids Help Phone, and then I think about the gaps, it really is the words, the stories, the impact of the end user themselves. And that's really hard to gather, right? If you are a face-to-face organization, you might not have transcripts. But are there other ways to collect those kinds of stories? Because that, I think, is what we're missing so much. And I'll tell you, over the last few years, we've been doing more and more of our building of new services co-designed with young people. And people are doing that all across the sector, which is amazing because they need to be involved. But again, when we choose to do co-design, what we're often doing is we're picking what I call the hand raisers. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I was a hand raiser. It's the young person who goes, oh, I want to be involved in co-design. I want to help build something. How do we make sure the quiet people, the people at the back of the class, the people who don't volunteer, that their needs and voices are also being heard? And again, at our charities and nonprofits, we're hearing them. They come to us. And so we have to find a way to leverage that data. I think the other question is often around, again, if you don't have a lot of resources, how do you even go about this? How do you start even thinking about what data you might have? Almost all of us have paperwork at the very least. We have our frontline filling out forms. So I would start thinking about, is there a way to take that paperwork and start organizing it in such a way that it goes from individual paperwork records to data? And again, it takes resources, it takes knowledge, but we all have that kind of data, regardless of how big or small we are, regardless of how many staff we have, or if we're volunteer or staff. It's really starting to think about where are those places that we might have information that if we had the support, whether it was funding or partnership, to be able to take that information and organize it, we would suddenly have data. And that's the piece that I think we need a mind shift change on within this sector, to really say, what information do I have that if I had the right process, the right funding, the right partnership, that information could be suddenly something that we know as data, and therefore be leveraged in really cool ways.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much to share this information about having the right data. We needed to be able to have the right data. How do we know even that we have the right or wrong data to be able to create also this environment where we provide everything needed from funding, support, technical skills, as Paloma also said, to make sure that we provide this environment where non-sector can flourish, can find, access this data, and then be able to use this data. Thank you so much for sharing this information. So I'm going to just to go and ask you a round question where I'm going to ask every one of you to give us your advice somehow as expert in this field. The question is going to be, what is your best piece of advice for people who are interested in learning more about the data, but are not sure where to start? So we started with Paloma, then Matt, and then Alisa. Thank you so much.
Of course, I will say, you know, go back to school, come to the masters, but no, but jokes aside, I think learning more about what you don't know, so knowing what you don't know is an important initial steps. There are so many ways going about what is data, and I think one of the things we are trying to do really at a basic level through the CICP is we created one of the pillar of the project is called the Community Education Center. And what we're trying to achieve here is really basic intro information about data literacy, and basic to the level, what is data, what is a variable, and we're not getting into more the technical parts, because there are great courses out there online at schools, universities, but oftentimes we just need these little pieces to connect the dots ourselves. And so it's really through, I think, allowing people to know what they don't know, and then kind of assess what they need, what they can do. One of the things, you know, the gap question that I didn't necessarily talk about, and Jacqueline, you will know, is that, you know, as academics in the field, sometimes it's hard to find support funding to do research on the field. So it's hard in the field, but as academics, it's hard to make a career studying the nonprofit sector, to be quite honest. And I think our funding agencies need to understand that, because I would give the advice, reach out to us, and if we can, we will find a way to partner. I think there is sometimes kind of this notion of, you know, not partnering enough with academics, and we're always happy and willing to work with organizations. But again, it's always a question of resources. There are very few. The community is small in Canada. We know each other, but I think it would be great to really better these collaborations, and I think that could help in many regards of what can we do, ideas, innovation, creativity within the sector around data.
Go ahead, Alisa, if you're having issues.
Oh, sure. And sorry, everybody. My computer has said it's about to shut down and it doesn't seem to care what I say. So if that happens, I apologize. So I think my piece of advice would be, given that we all get into this because we have heart and we believe in the mission of the organizations, that's why we do this, right? That's why we get into the work, whatever that cause is. If you were able to take a few hours and take a step back and say, if I had a magic wand, that's the question we often ask young people. If I had a magic wand, what would be different in better supporting the population that my charity is here to support? And if you think of that answer, then think, do I have anything within my service, my organization, my agency that could help make that happen? And then write that into your next funding proposal. write that in as a cost, whether it is turning your paper into data, whether it is hiring a part-time data person, whether it is partnering with a university, actually make that a part of your next funding proposal. Because we have to be able to dream it. We have to be able to see that our data can change the lives of the people we serve. And then we have to be able to make that happen. And so it doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. It can be starting with, for $20,000, I might be able to get a 10-hour-a-week data person to come in and help this. And so I'm going to write that into my next proposal. It might be, I can't get any money, but I could partner with a university or with an organization that has data capacity because they might be interested in what that story and vision is. So I think we have to understand as individual charities and nonprofits the why of our data so that we can help tell that story to partners and funders. And so that's the work that I think we can do as leaders within our charities, is try and understand what's the problem we want.
Yeah, I guess it happened. Okay. Matt, can you please take over?
Yeah. Lisa got most of the comments in, and I
Sure.
was just thinking I would be talking about a lot of the common things that she was talking about. So I would say, like, the biggest thing I would say is don't make it too complicated. And I'm just saying this because I've worked with a lot of groups. I'm also working on the big roadmap project. A lot of people are asked to give and collect a lot of data, and a lot of times it doesn't make sense. So one thing in terms of working with data and going there might just be like, how do we simplify it? How do we talk with those funders and make it so what we're collecting is less? Rather doing more, what's less? Another thing could be just in that same thing is like thinking about like the use. She was just talking about this. What's that impactful question about how you're going to use this question? I've always come this, and we've had things that were like, we have all this data, let's work with it and all this stuff, and the question wasn't there. And it just wasn't collected there. And if you just had one question around your primary thing that you're trying to solve with each of those programs, and that's probably all you can ask or you can do with the client you're working with. They're stressed out, they're having hard times, all of that stuff. You don't want to ask a ton of things. You want something that's relevant to what they're doing. So it's less, once again. It doesn't have to be fancy how you analyze it, all that stuff. You don't have to get a PhD. You don't have to go on a postdoc like myself. You don't have to do that. You can do fancy stuff by just, this is a simple question around the needs. It may be a qualitative thing, just a question like, how are you doing in terms of this domain that you're serving? In terms of that same thing as in terms of ease, the other thing is doing it right away. So starting early, if you want to have data and all that, more is better. So if you start when you're doing something, you have a new service, say, what's that question we're going to collect? Like she was just saying before she left, is when you have that funding call, plan for it up front. If you do that, you ask for that money, you have it, you're ready to go. And then, like she was saying, maybe you can do it. You have that capacity in your group. You can do it yourself. You can learn it. There are training courses and all that stuff. But if you can't, you can get help from someone. There's academics. There's groups that do that as well. Or there's lots of contractors. There's other options like for 10 hours a week around some simple need. But the thing that it'll come back to is, do you have that question? Do you have the thing that you're going? If you didn't collect it, and it's for your goals, it's not going to be there, and it's not going to be helpful. So that's a lot of points, but keep it simple.
Thank you very much, Matt and Alisa and Paloma. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise in terms of data for our sector. I wanted just to let you know that we have another webinar coming on March 27. For this one, we're looking to statistics, Canada data on our sector. So we'll include practical demonstrations on how we can use the statistics Canada data for things like fundraising, strategic planning, volunteer management. So the registration you will find in the chat, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and then we will see you on March 27.